Let's have a little chat about waveforming. A few of you guys have asked for a bit of an explanation on it, so I'm going to try and keep this really simplified. It's a really complicated system. It's trying to fix a really complicated problem, and the more you understand it, like most things in this world, the more complicated it gets, the more you realise this is a very, very difficult thing to achieve. So let's talk, what's waveforming doing? I'm going to assume everybody watching this might understand what a standing wave is or a room mode. Room mode is either a cancellation or a summation of interacting bass waves. Okay, so we either get peaks or nulls. Peaks we can EQ out for that particular position in the room, but obviously then elsewhere in the room where there isn't a peak, you're going to take that note away from other listeners. Cancellations are where those two interacting sound waves are cancelling each other out. So effectively the bass note gets taken away. That's going to be different for every seat in the room. And how do we defeat that? Because that's not a good listening experience. The only real way to do that is to move subs and move seats so that we get a nice even bass response. The difficult thing is it's not always possible to get everybody and all the subs in the right place. We can start adding more subs, for sure, but it gets fairly limited fairly quick to what you can actually achieve. So, Trinnnov came up with waveforming. Great system. Let's split that down into two basic forms of waveforming. So we have cylindrical waveforming, and then we have planar waveforming. Cylindrical is probably what most people are utilising, I would assume. I might be wrong, but I would assume. Cylindrical is the situation where you might have two subs at the front on the floor, two subs at the back on the floor. And then the full fat version is where you've got an array on the front wall and an array on the back wall of some description. Could be 6 on the front, 4 on the back, 3 on the front, 2 on the back, blah, blah, blah. What is waveforming doing? Well, depending on which version you have, it's going to act in a slightly different way and have more or less benefit depending on a million things. Cylindrical waveforming, so 2 subs at the front, 2 subs at the back. We are trying to defeat length modes, width modes, and height modes. Cylindrical waveforming is going to have quite good control over the length because it's able to absorb the wave of the length mode quite well. It's going to have some effect on width modes, depending on where those speakers are across the width. And then the height mode, if your subs are on the floor, it's going to have virtually no effect on height modes, which is kind of important room mode in certainly, UK cinema rooms, because we have average 2.4 meter ceiling height. We are sitting very close to that half height point. Most people understand that we don't put sofas or seats halfway in the length of a room because we have a huge room mode, mostly. It's the same for the height. And we quite often sit very close to that height mode of that 001 height mode. So how do we get around that? We could perhaps move our subs off the floor. There's a few ways of doing it, but cylindrical waveforming is going to be limited as to what it can do. Works really well on the length, has some effect on the width, virtually nothing on the height. Then we get into the full fat waveforming. Full fat waveforming is we move away from a cylindrical waveform to to a planar waveform. What's that doing then? So and this is all dependent on a million things. So I'm going to try and keep it simple without digging into the weeds. And if you guys want me to clarify this and go into any more detail of any of these points, then just drop me a line. badger me and I'll go into some more detail. Let's say that we've got 6 subs behind the front wall. We've got 4 subs at the back. What's that doing? So that's then going to, instead of creating a cylindrical wave that's going to form from the bottom corner of the room and propagate through the room, we're now producing a planar wave. That's going to be one great waveform pushing through the room, which is then going to be absorbed at the back. So we now have very good control of our length, we've got very good control of our width, and we've got very good control of our height. If it's done really well, we basically forget about room modes below 100 and something hertz, depending on the system. The more subs we have in our array, the slightly higher in frequency that we can control. It is almost a smoking gun up to its critical working height. It is basically a smoking gun, potentially, on fixing room modes up to 100 hertz, 150 hertz, depending on what subs you're using, how many you're using. It's very good. I've used it on a number of jobs now. It's phenomenal. Just having a wave propagate through the room. What are some issues with it? So, cylindrical waveforming. You are only getting output from your front subs. The rear subs are only acting as absorbers. We've got pressurization mode, which then below your first room mode, Trinnnov now can excite all 4 subs. Let's say that your first room mode's 23 hertz. Every frequency played below 23 hertz, all 4 subs are going to pressurize a room. But everything above that point, up until 150 hertz, wherever your LFE stops. So everything then from above your first room mode, 23 hertz in this case, up to 120 hertz, let's say. Everything in that is going to be just from your front 2 subs. So you could say that we're going to limit output for sure. Let's move on to a great big array of subs. Let's say we've got 6 at the front wall and we've got 4 at the back. Exactly the same situation. So your 6 subs, when you're calculating how much bass that your room's going to produce, you've got to kind of ignore the rear subs. Above your first room mode, up to the top frequency that your system's going to work at, your LFE channel, which then makes it look quite expensive. There's a caveat here to using large array systems. Unlike cylindrical waveforming, between the first room mode and the highest frequency thing will be playing through the system, or it can work to, you're only going to calculate the front subs as your output. With a full array system, although it's the same situation, you're only calculating for the front subs. It's now turning into a planar wave, which means that it's very likely that we're not having to consider a 6 dB loss per doubling a distance, because it's not losing its energy by widening its spherical like a normal speaker would, which is spherical, cylindrical, and then planar. A planar does not have the same propagation loss. Not well known, not well thought about, but it's absolutely happening. There's one thing I want to add to this, and this is a bit of a bolt-on that David Merowitz from Trinnnov has suggested I add, which didn't really quite give it the value in the video that I think it needed, so I'm going to add it on. There's one thing that cylindrical waveforming and all waveforming will do to a room that's very difficult to do, and that is decay control. How long that bass stays in the room, how many this bass is reflecting and reflecting and reflecting, right, until it effectively runs out of energy, which is many, many times. And one thing that we don't want are bass waves to hang around longer than we want them to. Simple as. Traditionally, we'd have tried to absorb that in some way, shape or form. I don't think we'll go into that here. That's a whole conversation on its own. But all forms of waveforming give unbelievable decay control, which on its own is worth having. Bass can take a huge amount of fluff and dimension away from the room. It's very hard to do traditionally. And we must not forget how important controlling decay is, and just how good waveforming is at controlling it. The nice thing with it, we can add decay. We can quite often add too much decay, which is great. I always like to go, if you can control something beyond where it's good, that's great, because you've got room to pull it back to where it's, where it sounds great. Very basics of waveforming. As I said, any more questions that you've got for me, any more explanations you want from me, hit me up.